much, Lord Michael Hastings, for joining me on Facing the Canon.
A great pleasure, always, John.
Thank you, Michael. Well, look, let's start at the beginning. Where were you born?
I was born in a little nondescript town in the north of England, south of Liverpool, called Wiston, which is next to Widnes, which is near Warrington. And most people have probably never heard of any of them, apart from the fact that Widnes has a very bad rugby club.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Now, you didn't stay there long because you ended up in Jamaica.
1966, when I was 8 years of age, my father decided that it was a good thing to go back to the Caribbean, to Jamaica.
Now, your parents, your mother was from?
My mother was from a place called Savannah Lamar in Jamaica. My father was born in Angola. My father was educated in England and then went to Edinburgh to do dental surgery. He then met my mother while fixing her teeth. So I find that always fascinating how normally when a dentist is looking into your mouth, they can't see anything other than what's in there. And how he found her attractive, I have no idea. But
maybe he could see her heart down
he
there.
probably could see all the way through. And yeah, fascinating.
So you ended up in Jamaica.
Yeah.
And spent a number of years there?
I spent 8 years there.
8 years. Can you do the Jamaican accent?
You want me to talk like this one?
Yes.
You want to put on the accent? I go down to Brixton, leave me alone, man. I can't beat you up. What?
Very good. Now, during that period, I gather that during the Cold War, that Jamaica was very sympathetic to Cuba. And as a result of that, the Americans didn't like it and withdrew their support of Jamaica.
Yes.
And that totally crippled its economy.
Well, I will remember very, very well 1970 when there was an election that brought in a prime minister called Michael Manley and the PLP party. And they were, bizarrely, having previously been a very moderate political party, they became pro-Cuban, which meant pro-Russian at that time. This was the middle of the Cold War period. The Americans, of course, who were ever open-minded, immediately cut off their relationships with Jamaica, withdrew their support for the bauxite industry. The tourist industry essentially dried up from the US. People still came from Canada and from Europe, but in that period of time, it was marginal. The island went from being a very happy, open, constructive and positive environment. As a child, I loved the warmth, not just the heat and the warmth of the temperature, but the sense of flow that people had in the ordinary community. And we lost that within a matter of weeks. And I remember visibly seeing black people spitting at white people in the street, and something that would never have happened before.
Wow.
So it was a very painful experience to go through, and that began to reduce the island after a couple of years to significant debt, loss of industry, loss of jobs, and then, of course, in came the gang culture, in came the drugs, and the rest is now a very sad history. Although I have to say, delighted to say, that Jamaica is struggling to get itself back on its feet.
Yes.
It has a new centre-left government, which is a responsible approach, trying to get the economy back into balance. But I buried my mother 3 years ago, was the last time I went to Jamaica. I was glad to see that systems work, but actually the sense of common community that I remember as a child in the 60s has never been recovered.
I read of a story about your mother. She got given by a relative some bars of soap who was visiting from Canada. Tell us about that story.
Well, during the difficult years, and the difficult years were really, for me, remembering 1970 to 1972, and that was when our parents decided to send my brother and I back to school in England. So those 2 difficult years, the shops essentially were denuded of ordinary groceries. You couldn't get basics like soaps or salt or cereals or onions or anything of that basic nature. And someone came from Canada, brought a box which was onions all the way round and soaps in the middle. And it was something like kind of 25 onions and 20 soaps. And the minute the box arrived at home, my mother's first response, open it up and to divide up 1 onion for here, 1 soap for there. She gave away every single thing that was in the box, bar 1 onion and 1 soap. And I remember saying to her, but look, we've got all of this supply for ourselves. And she said, but what about all the others I want to give it to? And so she literally just gave it all away.
So you grew up in a home where generosity was demonstrated?
All the time. All the time. I remember saying to my mother once, and this is, just be real about it, I remember saying to her, why don't you have, because she was putting her bra on, I was in the bedroom, she's putting her bra on, and I said, that looks very kind of, it was all thready and very old. And I remember saying to her, why don't you have a new one? And she said, but if we had a new one, that would be money that didn't go to the poor, so we're not going to have a new one.
So you grew up with
I
that
grew up
kind of
seeing that
DNA
all the time,
almost.
all the
Your
time.
parents sent you and your brother to school in...
Lancashire, to a wonderful school called
How did
Scarisbrick
you end up
Hall.
there?
Well, because when we had been first at school in England, we had gone to the school that was the junior of this senior school. So when the chance came to send us back to school, my parents automatically said, well, we know Charles Oxley, the head teacher of Scarisbrick Hall, which is why my title is from Scarisbrick, and so they decided to send us there as our secondary.
So when you became Lord and you needed to choose a location for your... Because you're like Lord Baron. What's your official title?
You want the whole thing?
The whole thing.
Okay. Here goes. The whole thing is the Right Honourable, the Baron, Lord Hastings of Scarisbrick, Commander of the British Empire.
Pretty good, isn't it? That's pretty good. So when you become a lord, you have to choose a particular location.
You do, because essentially it's a difficult thing to explain, but the way in which modern lords and baronesses are made is it's a form of re-entering the aristocracy. And the aristocracy were the landed owners who provided subventions or resources that went to support the crown. And that is what gave them seats in the upper house of Parliament. In order to come back into that establishment, you have to be in possession of a place. Right. So the Queen gifts you a place. Now, technically, I can't go out and sell Scarisbrick. I mean, nice idea if I could. But I've got the map of it at home on the wall. I'm closely involved with Scarisbrick Hall. In fact, I've just agreed to do a major prize for the school. They asked me to speak at their awards prize giving next year. But, I'm very involved still with the environment of the school. But the Queen gifts you this title. And this title is then what you take to be your place of relationship with the monarch. And that's how you become...
But obviously, by choosing that particular name, that school, is that because you had happy memories of your school?
I had abundantly happy memories of my school, abundantly happy memories. And if he was still alive now, I would love the head teacher, Charles Oxley, to be sitting here. He and I had an amazingly close relationship. At the age of 15, 16, I would sit in his office on a Saturday night, and he was in his early 60s, and we would read the Bible together. And for me, that was a wonderful thing where a man of his substance and significance wanted time with me as a young man who was seeking to learn how to follow Jesus more closely. And he would just open up the scriptures and we talked about them together. And we also I told him all about my family. He told me all about his family. One of his daughters was at the school. He would often tell me to pray for his daughter in this way and that way. He would pray for my brother. So I learned to sit under the leadership of an older man who taught me great spiritual disciplines, and I'm immensely grateful for that. And it wasn't just him, it was also my English teacher, who's still alive now, John Sutton Smith, and I remember him, a phrase I've often used with so many of those who are very close to me. He taught us as young boys, he said that the duvet is your greatest battle in life. So he used to say to us, the devil lives in the duvet. And so if you want to resist the devil, get up. And if you get up in the morning and submit yourself to scripture and to praying, then that's how you will really move forward in your spiritual journey.
So you leave school, you choose to go and study theology. What made you choose that?
Well, because my father was insistent that the only useful disciplines in life were medicine, which of course he'd been involved in, accountancy, I don't know why he loved accountancy, but he absolutely did, and law. So those are the only three useful things to do in life. And I decided, therefore, I'd do theology. No, the real reason...
Yes, that was one
The real reason
yes.
is because in 1973, I had attended a Billy Graham rally at Earl's Court. In fact, he'd been here for a week. It was a thing called Spree 73.
That's right,
Some folk might remember it. And at the end of that particular week, I'd been there for 5 days, and at the end of the week, Billy Graham had asked everyone who was under the age of 20 who would commit themselves to come down to the front to study biblical studies in order that they could serve Jesus around the world. And I was sitting right up in the top rafters of Earl's Court, and I just thought, but I knew, you have that impulse of the Holy Spirit upon you, and you just know you have to go forward. And at that point, I went forward and I stood there in front of that enormous, great big stage and committed myself at 15 years of age that I would go and study theology. So when my father gave me immense pressure about the 3 important disciplines of life and the great academic pursuit I should go after, I knew I had to do theology.
So you studied at London Bible College, which is now called London School of Theology in Northwood.
Yep.
Happy time?
Very happy time, immensely happy time. 3 years. I mean, I would say probably the second year, and maybe some other students have found this complexity. Some of the academic study, particularly the rigorous study of church history, is not very encouraging. And so you look at stuff that you kind of think, where has that kind of advanced my relationship with Jesus? Not an awful lot. It's given me some difficult balance to think about how complex church history is and how the church has managed to screw itself up rather badly in the world. But I was delighted to leave our second year and go into our third year when we got back to things of more significant progression. But so good memories, very clearly good.
Very good. You graduated from there and then went into teaching.
Yeah, I did.
And was that an intentional thing, or?
I hadn't wanted to go into teaching. I'd actually wanted to work in the media because for a long time, while I was at Scarisbrick Hall, and one of the things that Charles Oxley made me do, so this is, if I can remember right, 1975, 76, something like that. He asked me one day if I would gather a group of other sixth formers. I was in the lower sixth at the time, so I was 17. Would I gather a group of other sixth formers around and monitor a week's television? And I said, wow, that sounds like fun. You've been given a kind of free rein to go. And in those days, you'll remember, John, because you're older than me. In those days, more hair though, and better dye. But anyway, in those days, we only had BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV. We didn't have all the rest of it. So to monitor from 5:45, which was the news, through to close down, which was around 10:30 in those days, this was quite fun. And what we were monitoring for was the content, moral content he was after, and physical violence and other things. So I had a team of about 40 other sixth formers who worked with me, and we did this report. At the end of it, handed it over, went off on an Operation Mobilization mission, George Vover's mission, to Paris, left it all alone, and came back to a media storm. And the reason it was a media storm was that he decided to publish all of these findings under my name, called the Hastings Report. And that was very unfair, but a very interesting, opportune moment. And that led me to working closely with broadcasting and radio and television, heaps of interviews, lots of newspaper content. And then I started working very closely with somebody many people recognize called Mary Whitehouse. And I was a great fan of Mary Whitehouse, really adored her as a significant older woman. I really respected the mission that she had and really believed strongly in her sense of perspective and her wisdom. It's so easy to parody people like that and to misunderstand them, but it was a great treat to travel around the country with her. So I had actually got a fascination with broadcasting, and I wanted to work in the media. And ironically, I'd been offered a training job at the BBC, but I spotted, while I was training for teaching, a job advert, very cheekily, for a head of department at a school in West London. And as it happens, the deputy head of that school is sitting here in the audience right now, and she was responsible for appointing me to the position of a head of department role in a school when I hadn't even qualified.
And that was when?
That was 1980. Yeah, 1980, 81, something like that.
So she met with you and obviously took a liking.
Well, she was sitting in the room when I was being interviewed, and I think they came to a decision that they wanted to appoint me to that role. And I had a struggle for 3 days because I had this role at the BBC. I'll be honest and say I thought the school was a dump, and I wasn't keen on it, having, I mean, she's here now, she's going to come and beat me up afterwards. But, the school was not a great place from my first view of it. But, God spoke to me on a journey back from the school in West London back to the college in Oxford, and he spoke to me very clearly and said, the things you feel that you're going to progress on in life are in my hands. Take the steps that I want to take you on. So submit to my will, go and teach at that school. The rest I'll release to you.
And that's often the case, isn't it, Michael? There's, sometimes these detours that appear like detours and distractions are times when God, it's like an apprenticeship, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Preparing us for the next step.
Absolutely.
And you did end up at the BBC.
I did end up at the BBC many years later.
And you were with the BBC for how
12
long?
years.
But you did a variety of different things
Yes.
while you were there.
I did. I started off doing television mainly. I was doing some news reporting, but I was also presenting a political programme on BBC Two every weekend.
But didn't you present weekly the Westminster...
It was called Around Westminster.
Around Westminster. Yeah, you did that, didn't you?
Yeah, every Sunday. It was great. It's great fun doing that. I loved doing it, but I actually found that the time you spend with politicians and interviewees in that very kind of rapid push around that you do in political interviewing or journalism really didn't bring about any depth. I didn't develop any meaningful relationships with them. It was short term. It was very much a news agenda. And then the BBC asked me, the Director General's office rang and said, would I come and take over the public affairs responsibility? And I kind of said, why? You know, I've been doing broadcasting. Why do I want to? And the public affairs job was to be the liaison between the BBC, Parliament and government. So I was constantly in and out of Westminster, day in, day out, pretty much
And was that a new
non-stop.
position that was being created?
Yes, essentially it was. There had been somebody in that role, but they really needed, what they were looking for was somebody who knew how to, for want of a better phrase, work the politicians.
Yes. And you did that for how long?
I did that for 9 years. For 9 years.
And then you were invited to become a Lord.
Yes.
And at that time, did you have to leave the BBC
No.
to be impartial, or
No,
how
because
does that work?
well, one of the funny things discovered when this opportunity to go into the House of Lords was coming about, the BBC had very important rules then, very important rules about anybody who took up a political office, if they became an MP for a political party or they became a councillor with a political party. But ironically, no one at the BBC had ever gone into the House of Lords before, so there was actually no guidance around the issue whatsoever. So it was a nice open feast, and I went into the House of Lords and I carried on working at the BBC.
Right, just help us understand the House of Lords. What does it do?
Well, a couple of salient facts.
Yes.
And I'm a great advocate and defender of the House of Lords, and long may it live on. It actually does, to be perfectly candid, the job the House of Commons doesn't do, which is to, in detail, pursue line by line, phrase by phrase, the nature of every bill that comes from either the lower house of Parliament, as in the House of Commons, or begins in the House of Lords. The House of Lords meets as a committee of the whole House, whereas in the Commons, you tend to get these smaller groups of MPs who go upstairs for a couple of weeks, haggle around, the government always has the majority, and they come out with more or less the same bill they went in with. In the House of Lords, the government does not have a majority. The crossbenchers or the independent members hold the balance. The committee, every committee is the committee of the whole House, and we deal with legislation in fine and intimate detail. I mean, one of the most interesting pieces of legislation that came to us in the last couple of years was when there had been some difficulties with payments, otherwise called expenses,
Yes.
in the Commons. And Gordon Brown, the then Prime Minister, had created a new bill which was designed to regulate MPs' expenses. The bill came through the House of Lords with over 200 MPs' amendments not considered. Came up to the House of Lords, and MPs lobbied the Lords about their expenses.
Yes.
So we were finishing the job that they couldn't complete. Now, that's not to say that the House of Commons doesn't operate reasonably effectively. It does, but it's politically controlled. The House of Lords is not politically controlled. It exists to serve the interests of the nation as a whole. It gives time constructively to legislation. Members are not paid unless they are ministers. We receive expenses, but we're not paid. People are there voluntarily to serve the wider interests of the country and the world community.
But most people in the House of Lords have other responsibilities elsewhere.
Yes.
So how's the juggling taking place where you can be in the House of Lords, you know, and be a strong voice there while you've got other responsibilities?
Well, probably around about half of the active members. There are just under 800 members on the roll, but probably only about 450 attend on a regular basis, and probably around about half of that number are working outside. So there are at least 250, roughly 200 members who are able to attend day in, day out. They've either
Okay.
worked and had pensions, or they're living on the expenses they receive, or they have income from other sources. But also you get active. I'm able to attend the Lords probably 4 to 5 days a month on average with all my travel and other work responsibilities.
And is that dependent on what the subject is?
No. I think it's an important thing simply to be there for the sake of understanding the ebb and flow of issues that the country is thinking about. It might be issues around mental disability, it might be issues around prisons, it could be issues to do with asylum seekers, it could be about refugees and statements on Syria. It doesn't matter what the issue is, it's just about being there to be a participant in the important dialogue of the affairs of the nation.
Okay, so from the BBC, you become a Lord, you then join KPMG.
Yep.
Okay, what does KPMG stand for?
Well, that's a very good question. And I know what the P and the M stand for, which is Piet Marwick, but the other two, one is German, one is Dutch. But basically, it's the coming together of 3 to 4 firms of accountants
That
came together.
And it's a big firm. It employs
162,000 people in 156 countries.
And it's based, its main office is in Amsterdam.
No, well,
where is it now?
That's a registration office.
Is that for tax purposes?
No, it's not. No, it's for administration purposes.
Oh, really?
Our chairman at the moment is based in Hong Kong. Our
yes.
chief operating officer is based in Toronto. Our deputy chairman is in Spain. I'm in London. You know, it's a huge global network.
Okay, now your responsibility, Michael, is what?
I'm global head of corporate citizenship.
Now that sounds very clever. What does it mean?
It's a really clever title, isn't it?
It sounds very important.
Well, maybe.
But unpack it for us.
Okay. I have some direct responsibilities and a direct team of people who work with me, both here in the UK and around the world. So my direct responsibilities are the oversight of KPMG's internal environmental and sustainability agenda. In other words, how are we dealing with our carbon, the impact of our carbon on the environment? What is our attitude to environmental policy and to climate change? Those things sit within my responsibility. I'm also responsible for KPMG's partnerships with major global NGOs such as World Vision, UNICEF, Save the Children, a multitude of others, because we have a development commitment as a business organization. We're committed to the Millennium Development Goals. We're committed to the eradication of long-term hunger and poverty. We're committed to fair justice for women. We're committed to good education. And we fund and resource programs that make that happen. And then I'm also directly responsible for the advocacy of the involvement of all of our people in the issues of their community, their cities, and their countries. Now, what I mean by that, let me give you a practical example of that. And I'll go all the way from here to Australia to pick on a very good practical example. KPMG's been involved for the last 4 years in a program called Jawan, which is an indigenous Australian word, and it means partnership. And there are 22, 25 companies, mainly banks, financial institutions, accountancy firms, who second people for 5 weeks at a time. So we've seconded nearly 200 people for 5 weeks at a time to work with the Aboriginal indigenous communities in the north and in the west of Australia. This is to help them to develop their capacity for self-determination, for good governance, and for free living, to support their education programs and to give them lifestyles of stability, because there has been a lot of classic difficulty around addictions in that community. So we've been working directly with other businesses to empower the indigenous communities of Australia to stand on their own 2 feet. That's a direct corporate citizenship program of KPMG Australia. But our chairman in Australia, a fantastic man, Peter Nash, he's also on the board of an organisation called Reconciliation Australia. And the role of that organisation is to campaign for changes in the law in Australia to bring the indigenous people into equal status with the white Australians. So the original Australians are outside of the normal remit of equal opportunities and equal rights. So we're actively involved in the strategy and policy and the practical delivery of programs and support.
So the value system within your organisation that you work at the moment is good. You'd say it's good.
Extremely good, yes.
And one that you would encourage in other organisations.
Yes. I mean, I would say, with all honesty on my heart, that KPMG is a great place to work.
Yes.
And I can say that with huge integrity and commitment. I meet with our leadership, our global leadership and our national leadership frequently. These people firmly believe in their role in supporting communities. They firmly believe that they should be alongside major NGOs working on behalf of the poor, with the poor, to empower people into freedom, education. We run sanitation programs. We help people gain sustainable long-term lives, deliver employment in parts of the world that many organizations can't get to. And we give stability to the market system. And that's incredibly important.
But one thing you could encourage them while you're with them at this position, in this position of influence, is that maybe they could work towards giving 10% away.
Well,
because you would then set a kind of a precedent for other corporations.
Well, I'm going to give a smart answer to that, which is I reckon that if we tabulated the costs of the time that we do give away and all the free pro bono services that KPMG does all over the world for NGOs as well as organizations in the public realm, I'm sure we give away about 20%.
But Michael, if I collated the time that I give to people freely and all the times I go into prisons and pay for it for myself, I still double my tithe on top of that as well.
That is true, but the payment rates of our people are somewhat above those of Canon's.
Well, would that be something you might consider in one of your conversations with the bosses?
Now you've entered the thought into my mind. I'll pursue it. I'll pursue it. But what I'm keen to emphasize is, and I really think this is very important, is that money is one way to register engagement. But time, particularly professional time, that can really make a profound difference. Let me give you a little example.
Yes.
When I first came to KPMG in 2006, and I went to our International Partners Conference in Buenos Aires, I decided to go via a smaller country, Jamaica, to Kingston, not to where my family were, but I went to Kingston. I was taken around a private hospital in Kingston, which KPMG there has actively supported. The minute we entered the door, the senior surgeon consultant said to us, we need about $70,000 to do this, and this. So we had 2 hours going around the hospital. We took our head of audit with us.
Yes.
At the end of it, he tabulated over $100,000 of savings that they could make. So in other words, by using our technical skills and our intelligence, we can actually get more resources for people very often than just writing them a check. Because if we'd just written a check, the inefficiencies would have continued.
Okay. And that's absolutely fair point. Over the years, you've been involved through KPMG and the work that you do, through the other organizations that you're either a trustee of or you've been the chairman of or the president of, in crime reduction. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about that, because that goes back years that you first got involved in that.
Absolutely. 1988, the then Home Secretary Douglas Hurd rang me up one day and said, because I was doing other work with him on race relations matters, and he rang up and he said, Michael, would you consider with someone else setting up an organization called Crime Concern? And I said, what is it you want this to do, Home Secretary? And he said, we really believe there is a need for alternatives to custody, different ways of helping people who've been trapped by the criminal justice system not just go to prison, but actually have meaningful ways to use their time in the community, different ways of approaching criminal justice, and we need to try out some methods and models. So we established 1988 Crime Concern. Crime Concern was probably most famously known for creating Neighborhood Watch and victim support, and those are two great things that came out of what we brought together. I had an amazing board of senior police leaders and people from industry and business. I was a trustee for 21 years, chairman for 15 years, and my final act as chairman was to bring Crime Concern, an organization of about £22 million at that time, together with the Rayner Foundation, which was about £24 million. We merged the two organizations. We created Catch-22, and now Catch-22 is 3 times bigger than we were. So it's been a wonderful outcome to believe that actually the best way sometimes to serve the public interest is to step away from it.
So obviously you've done a lot of thinking about this, Michael. Is crime getting worse or is it getting better?
Well, the statistics today, 2013, indicate that crime in most British cities is lower now than it was 10 to 15 to 20 years ago. people's perceptions are a different reality, particularly when it comes to violent personal crime.
Yes.
So you'll still get very high resonance on surveys of people feeling that their communities may not be very safe. But the facts of recorded crime and the sense of well-being in our communities is actually better than it was 20 years ago, even 15, even 10 years ago.
Do you think it's because of the media magnifies crime that makes us think it's much bigger than it really is?
Well, because these horror stories
Yes.
of somebody being attacked, or a horror story of some
Yeah.
dreadful group event, fill the front pages, fill page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, occupy social media to a large extent that we become absorbed in that pressure. And we become so absorbed in it that we forget actually that around us it's pretty peaceful, it's relatively normal. Now, there are still parts of our communities, still parts of our inner cities where things are tense. Let's not pretend at all. We lived for a quite considerable period of time in southeast London. I remember in the 7 years that we lived in Peckham, we didn't have a single criminal incident around us, not one. And I can believe that it is possible to live in tough inner city communities and still see comprehensive harmony. I was recently in the Congo, just to switch to a slightly different place. I went to Kinshasa a couple of months ago, which is the capital of the DRC. And one of the things that's fascinating about the Congo is the comprehensive darkness of a capital of 9 million people. Less than about 500,000 people have got electricity. So what you see is this penetrating negative darkness. You'd think that in that environment it would be absolutely, utterly threatening. But everybody I met in those few days I was there told me that it feels remarkably safe. Very few incidences of attack. Burglary is almost non-existent. People do not pillage and take from one another. And I actually went around asking a senior government executive, why was this? And he said the faith community here is powerfully strong.
That's so encouraging, isn't it? In your work with KPMG, you've kind of embraced some of the United Nations kind of principles or targets. There are 3 in particular.
Yes.
Yeah, what are those 3?
Well, I've had a mission all my life. And when I say all my life, I mean from the age of 16, I became very aware that God wanted me to be a voice for the poor.
Yes.
And so that is really the driving force in everything that I do, is to articulate the case for the poor, put the energies of big organizations towards resourcing and supporting the poor and making sure that the voice of those who are unheard is heard in prominent places. So I encouraged our global board to believe that we as an accounting, tax and business strategy organization should get alongside the UN Millennium Development Goals. We had a choice of 8 major goals, which cover everything from sanitation issues, environment issues, human rights issues, girls' education, through to extreme poverty. Our board opted for MDGs 1, 2, and 3, which is to halve the levels of extreme poverty and hunger by 2015. And the good news is that target has been met. It was announced at the UN just a week ago. It's a fantastic outcome. But that still means that there are 48% of people living in extreme poverty who were in the same poverty 10 years ago. So MDG 1 is halve extreme poverty. MDG 2 is about the delivery of primary education. And MDG 3 is to promote women's progression. Right. And we work very solidly on those agendas. Just
explain a little bit more about each of the 3. So as you see it, what do you mean when you say poverty?
Well, what I mean when I say poverty is are the 1.2 billion people in the world who still live on less than $1.50 per day. That does mean that tonight, as we sit here now, tonight somewhere in the region of 800,000 people will go to bed without having had a meal today. They might have had one yesterday, might have a small one tomorrow, but they haven't had one today. Roughly 38,000 children will die tonight, and 38,000 died last night and will die tomorrow. And there's a combination of malnutrition, poor diet and health, sanitation issues, and just lack of food resource. Now, those are just ugly, still uncomfortable realities about 2030. And that's what I mean by extreme poverty. People who don't have access to water, electricity, or food.
What would you say when people have said that in some of these countries, the governments are corrupt, they're misusing the resources that they've got, hence their people are destitute. Some of the countries where these poor people are in. The countries have got nuclear weapons. So they have got money, but they're choosing to buy nuclear weapons rather than feed their people. But they're expecting the West to bail them out.
I agree, absolutely. It is uncomfortable. According to official figures, 8 times as much money leaves the continent of Africa in corrupt overseas payments as goes in international aid and investment every year. That is a deeply uncomfortable and unacceptable thought. There are politicians and there are business people who are aggrandizing themselves and gaining wealth on the backs of the destitute. But what do I do faced with village communities, ordinary people who need the commitment resources that we're still able to provide? I face a choice of day-to-day compassion, that's really important, but also at the same time, strategic engagement is going to drive the change long-term. We have KPMG International, we have a 5-year commitment to a community of 10,000 people on a tiny island called Pemba off the coast of Tanzania. I visited every summer. I went this year with a group of people from Japan, the Netherlands, and the UK, all from the KPMG offices. We've committed $2 million to make sure that those 10,000 people who had no sanitation when we first went, no electricity, no school blocks and buildings, no hospital, no maternity care, no pharmaceuticals, and no industry, now have all of that.
Yes.
And I really believe that this long-term strategic commitment, not short-term, not project, not drop-in, not pick-up, not one child, it's the whole thing. That I believe when we finish the job next year, we will have left behind a community of independent, free, sustainable, employable people. I'm proud of that.
That's fantastic, Michael. But you know, if in a river you see people who are drowning, you're going to pull them out.
Yeah.
And then you keep pulling out all these people, and there's more people pulling them out. Don't we also have to walk up the river to see who's throwing them in?
Oh, precisely. And that is really important. So we're actively involved, not just with the UN, but with the government, with the major governments of the world, actively involved in all the strategic programs you need around anti-corruption, around transparency reporting, around proper principles on responsible investment. In fact, KPMG wrote the guidelines on responsible investment that were published at the UN just 2 weeks ago on the 20th of September. You know, we have a really key commitment to making sure that human rights priorities are brought to the highest agenda. I chaired the UN Business Leaders Conference in New York earlier this year. I make sure that the voice of responsible business is right there at the core of the decision-making framework. We're determined that even if we can't win every little war and we can't achieve the right thing for every possible child or community, we'll do what we can.
So that was the one, Michael. Second one was education.
Well, this is primary education. The MDG goal,
of course,
is provision of primary education.
Yes.
Universal provision of primary education, and that has also been achieved.
And and the current situation in the world?
Big tick, done. It's been done.
And the third one is?
The third one is the empowerment of women. Now, that's a really important and complex issue because that does mean, realistically, in so many of the poorest countries in the world where women's rights are not equal, women don't necessarily have the right to land registration, so they can't possess land and own land and therefore be able to farm it and control the assets. They don't have control rights over their own bodies. They don't have control rights over who they marry. Those are all sorts of critical principles, and we're working closely with the UN human rights objectives and priorities, but also where we can. And this is a wonderful example, which is called the Global Give Back Circle. President Clinton recently congratulated KPMG and Microsoft for working closely together on this mentoring program where we have women all over the world in our offices mentoring girls, in particular in Kenya, and they do that online. And so as President Clinton said, you know, you're literally helping to change the world one girl at a time. And we do that from our offices in New York and our offices in Frankfurt and our offices in Buenos Aires, and they mentor girls online to give them encouragement to continue with their education, but to solve their learning issues and to support them in the progress of their development.
That's fantastic. Do you know, a couple of times I think that warranted a few applauses. So you're kind of constantly thinking about basically at the heart of all of this, how can we use our resources for good?
Yes.
There's a lovely verse in the Bible, Michael, in the book of Micah, where it says, you know, what does God want us to do? And then the answer is in one sentence. You know, he wants us to do justice,
love mercy,
and walk humbly with God. So It's justice and mercy and humility. I've known you for 20 years. I think that's what you embody in you and in what you're trying to do. Why do you think people are resistant, it appears, in business, in the world, to be more caring and more charitable?
Well, there's a sort of exhaustion element out there, which is things have been tried and failed. But there's probably a deeper issue, which is cynicism. And I firmly believe that cynicism is one of the greatest sins you can ever commit, because it is where you are just negative about every option and every possibility.
Yes.
And one of the other things, you know, and this is in Revelation 21, God is very down on people who lack courage. And actually to have courage, to be determined to say, look, there's an issue that needs commitment, time, energy, and resolution. I'm going to put my back into it and to fight for it. I'm going to articulate the case for it. I'm going to put whatever necessary energy I can. I'm going to find resources to make a difference. And I'm not going to be cynical about the possibilities. I'm not just going to say things have been tried and failed. I really believe firmly that we've got to remove this uncomfortable and unnecessary apathy that goes with cynicism. We've got to be prepared to take risks, and those risks frequently mean doing the uncomfortable things that cause us stress but are necessary for the outcome.
Now, you're a committed Christian, committed practicing Christian, and you don't hide that.
I don't, no.
No. And what difference does your faith make to you in your life and in your work?
Well, I mean, one of the decisions I take as a whole is I try not to use the word Christian anywhere as much as possible. I prefer to always say to people, I'm following Jesus.
Yes.
And I find that that's incredibly accommodating all over the world. I can meet with people of every disposition.
Yes.
And I can talk about Jesus in a business environment, in a public environment, and I find no resistance whatsoever. If I introduce the word Christian, people get into all sorts of tension. So for pretty much however many years, 1972, when I submitted to my older brother's final question of when are you going to make a decision, and I said on the 28th of August 1972, I will now submit to Jesus. I really wanted to follow him closely. And what that has meant for me all the way along is that every priority for me is filtered through, does this serve the kingdom of God? Does this support the priorities of Jesus? Is this what he would want me to focus on for this next season of life? How can I bless those around me because they're brought to me in his name? And how can I take his name to places in government and in business and in public office where it is a privilege to be able to share him very openly?
Are you more encouraged than discouraged? Are you quite a positive person? The glass is half full.
The glass is always full, it's never half.
It's overflowing. So you're quite positive about...
Yes, I'm a permanent optimist, I have to be, because I rub shoulders day in, day out sometimes in my work environment and other personal environments with a lot of stress and pain and pressure, and people who are on the edges of life and struggling, and people who can't see hope and don't feel that their lives add up to very much. And it's a great privilege to put an arm around somebody's shoulders and to support them creatively. It's a great privilege to make connections that allow somebody else to get an opportunity. I've had opportunities flowing at me non-stop, and they continue to come. Invitations galore. I have to turn down 90% of them. But I'm delighted to be able to facilitate things for others. And I'm delighted to be able to use the privileges of my office, either in Parliament or in business or in the charities. I'm a vice president of UNICEF. I'm a vice president of Tearfund. I'm chairman of Millennium Promise. I'm president of the Zimbabwe Aid Agency. So I get to impact huge communities around the world here and here at home. And it makes a massive difference. Every day is full of some meaningful purpose. I never have a single day that looks like any other. And that's never been the case in however many years. How old am I now, John? 55.
55. We text weekly, and sometimes Killy says to me, "Oh, where's Michael?" And I say, "Oh, I think he's in Timbuktu."
Quite literally.
So, tell us, in the last 2 weeks, where have you been?
Well, I got back today from the Cayman Islands, and I was there on work.
So you arrived at lunchtime?
I arrived at lunchtime.
Lunchtime today, yeah.
I started my journeys 13 days ago in San Francisco. I was doing some lectures at the University of California, Berkeley College, then spending a day with one of our major clients on business, and then moved on to Cancun in Mexico, where we sponsor a very major student conference every year, which is an awards event, around about 3,000 students and business leaders. I'm a judge, but also I presented a series of discussions for the business community who were present from Cancun, then went through Atlanta down to Johannesburg to take part in another business leaders conference called One Young World, where I was chairing a session on global business, as well as our group of people we had from 9 countries, 12 people from 9 countries participating. Then came back through London last Sunday to go down to the Cayman Islands, and just spent 3 days in the Cayman Islands, came back today.
So that was like 2 weeks?
13 days, yes.
13
so just
days,
under 2,
just under 13 days. So a little bit of wear and tear.
A little bit of wear and tear, it's true. It's
people sometimes say to me, how are you, J.John? And I say, well, there's not too much wrong with the model, it's the mileage. So we wouldn't really get you to do a seminar on kind of getting a good balance in life.
No, I would happily do a seminar on that, because I do think one of the things that gives people an enormous sense of energy in their lives, and actually, interestingly, American Express have just published a major survey on this, is if you ask the question, what is it that gives people the highest levels of motivation? And one of the things that's in there is it kissing someone, for example? Or is it seeing your favorite team win at sport? Or is it receiving a gift? Or is it meeting an old friend? And here is the result: helping other people achieve their potential. That is the most motivating thing humans can do.
Yes.
And so every day for me is about that balance, helping other people achieve their potential.
And the thing about you, Michael, is, you know, I've known you for 20 years. You do practice what you preach, and you personally are mentoring and coaching a new generation of leaders. How many? I mean, you're networking constantly. I've asked you to introduce lots of my friends to people because you have access and you've always done that. But you personally are mentoring how many people?
About 22.
22?
24. Sometimes forget 1 or 2.
Yeah, but you're trying to so what are you trying to do for them? You're trying to invest your time, your wisdom, how are you doing it?
Well, some of them are not followers of Jesus. So if I think of one lovely guy I mentor called Tekeste, who's Ethiopian, but he's working in Beijing. He's in his late 20s, and I talk to him every month. We have a detailed conversation about how he's doing in his life, and I said to him the other day, I actually talked to him from Cancun, and I said, Tekeste, if I send you Purpose-Driven Life, will you read it? And he said, I will, because we had a detailed conversation about the next phase of, he's working in IT industry, he's extremely bright. So I spend time with people like him. I spend time with a lot of people here in London, where we've built up quite a significant network of brothers and friends to encourage one another to grow in our relationship with Jesus. And the priority is to grow in their relationship with Jesus. So for some of them, it's a professional relationship, as in career-related matters or professional issues or connections with industry. But for an awful lot of others, it is actually about the priority of seeking and following him and knowing how better to worship him more closely, how to read the Bible together well, how to understand his priorities, how to seek after the heart of Jesus, and understand how he will draw us into the central place of where he wants us to be without fear.
So you have a great intentionality about doing that, because really a man in your position and a man in your influence has limited time, but you're making time.
I'm actively making time. It's an immense joy to me to be able to do that. I was recently with a very dear friend who is from a Hindu family. We've spoken very closely together in the last couple of weeks about reading John's Gospel. He started reading John's Gospel, and I'm delighted that he's asking me questions about how to follow Jesus as a result of that. Other people who are not yet believers, I ask them to read the scriptures so we can discuss it and dialogue. And it's just a way of helping people look into his eyes and discover who he is. To me, it really matters that they find their own place with him and that they have their own close relationship with him. And I'm just a conduit of that opportunity.
One of the people that you've helped, who I've met, Neal, and his wife, Lesotho, tell us their story, because that's quite a remarkable story.
It's a great and a fascinating story. Neal is an American, a white American, tall, very muscular, strong.
Harvard
graduate, also Cambridge graduate, captain of the rowing team at Harvard, captain of the rowing team at Cambridge. You can kind of picture the guy, if you like, immensely bright, extremely numerate. Lesotho, his lovely wife, when I was there at their wedding 3 years ago, she is an orphan from Mafeking, which is on the border of Botswana and South Africa. Her parents died when she was in her early teens, and so she had to bring up her younger brother on her own. And they met, ironically, in New York. And it was a great delight for me to... I was asked by another very dear friend, Anthony Caudle, who you know well, who sent me a text message from Washington saying, I've just come across this fascinating American guy. He's coming to London. Would you be prepared to spend time? In fact, he actually said, will you look after him? So I said, sure, Anthony. I've known Anthony for 37 years, and he's been a mentor to me for 37 years. And so when Anthony asked me to do something, I will do it.
Yes.
So I met this guy, Neal. He came to the KPMG office. There was I expecting, because his title was, he was Senior Vice President, Capital Group, which is the largest private investment corporation in the world. And I was thinking, oh, I'm going to get somebody in a suit and a tie and somebody who looks very businesslike and shiny shoes and all those kind of things. And when I came down to the reception, I said to our receptionist, is Neal here? And they said, oh, yes, he's over there. And I looked over there, and there was a guy in shorts and trainers and a sweaty top because he'd cycled to the office. And I said, no, I'm looking for Neal Holtzapfel from... They said, no, that's him over there. And that was the beginning of an incredibly close walk of faith and commitment to one another, helped him to sort out some complex relationships, then helped him to get married to Lesotho. I was present at the birth of their first child, of which I'm godfather. They've just had their second child a couple of months ago. They're now here in London for a period of time to study development studies at the London School of Economics. But they're working in South Africa, and they're working closely amongst orphan groups. Neal has taken on hundreds of orphans himself, not in a legal adoption mode, but supporting orphans who don't have families, and he pays their way through education, through private education, and onto tertiary education. They provide food support for the families. Had a privilege with my older son to be able to go. Yeah. Paul, who's here, we went to visit one of those orphan groups in South Africa a couple of months ago. It was a stimulating experience to witness it. So it's been a journey of joy and commitment. And then I connected you with Neal, and then you met with his brother in Washington, and you led his brother to know Jesus.
I did. And what's amazing about Neal, though, he's very, very successful.
Yes.
In what he does.
Immensely so.
But he gives away nearly all of his income.
Well, before he got married, he gave away nearly all of his income. Just for the record.
I know. No, but even
now, they give away a huge amount. Yes.
Wasn't he giving away 97% of his income to support the orphans?
Yes, 94%.
94% of his income to support thousands of orphans in South Africa.
He was living on less than the minimum wage in London, although he was earning at a level at which most people would be jealous.
Yeah. But he was just
He's captivated. And the reason he was captivated by this was because when he was at Harvard, he had spent time listening to the BBC World Service and came across some of the issues that were in the Congo, particularly questions around child soldiers and also orphaned children. And there was a massive crisis of orphan children all over the continent of Africa, a massive crisis of child soldiers. In fact, I recently met a lovely man called Emmanuel Jal. I met him in Johannesburg just 2 weeks ago. He was a child soldier. He was a child soldier from the age of 8 until when he was about 14, 15, and I spent 2 evenings with him in Johannesburg. He's come to Jesus. We had a really good conversation together. In fact, I'm seeing him on Friday.
So what's on your bucket list, Michael? What's on your list that you still aspire to do?
That's a very good question. A long time ago, a very long time ago, someone gave me what they said was something that God wanted me to know, which was that I would be able to access any place in the world possible. And there isn't, of the significant royal families, I know them. Of the significant political leaders, I've met them all, I can access them. Of the significant people in business, I know them. That doesn't motivate me. What motivates me is there are two things that motivate me. Seeing solutions come together for the poor that are long-term, that deliver real good outcomes and set people free. I really believe passionately in that, and I really believe in the transformation of individual people's lives. Spending time with people as they learn how to stand up and become free. I think that is a huge motivator, as is the support for the people on the edge.
I've known you, as I've said, 20 years. I think you're one of the nicest people I know. And you're one of the kindest and definitely one of the most generous that I've come across. And it is incredible how you are in this position of great influence. And yet, within it all, you hold it very, very lightly, Michael, just endeavouring to practice what you're preaching to others. And you're a great inspiration to me and to my wife, Killy, and to my sons, as you know. And I really hope that our conversation would have inspired all of us today a little bit more in taking what we know and helping others, because I think that's really what you're about. If you had to sum it up for yourself, what would you say? What are you about?
Well, Anthony's taught me two important things in all of these years. I've had many fantastic mentors. My head teacher at school, a wonderful Major General in the British Army called John Nelson, who really helped me in my 20s. We spent a lot of time with him understanding strategy. And this dear friend Anthony, who I met when I was just as 18 years of age. And we still walk in fellowship and friendship with each other all the time. And he taught me two really important principles. Principle number one was that the thing that Jesus asks most of us, i.e. the question, what have I got to do the works of God? So many people ask that, what do I got to do, what do I got to be, what's the action? And Jesus says it is to believe in him, in the one that he has sent. So I'm hugely about encouraging those around me to learn to believe, and that I should learn to believe. Pull away from the striving and the action and the pressure and the doing and the performance and all of those things that get in the way, and the clutter of religion, and believe, really believe. But the second thing that he taught me, very importantly, was that every connection is important. Every connection is important because the person is important. And so it's vital to treat every contact, every connection, every relationship with huge dignity and commitment, to spend time on it, to invest in it, to value the other person's opinion, to listen to what they have to say. And if I want one thing written on my tombstone, it is not he tried and failed, because I probably have, but rather he longed to make an impact, and there were few that followed Jesus better.
On that note, Lord Michael Hastings, thank you very much.